My name is Tiffany Stewart. I was the Assistant Director of the Department of Water and Sewer Utilities for the City of Newark, as Maureen stated. Kareem, do you want to introduce yourself, Director Adeem?
Hello, everyone. I'm Kareem Adeem. I'm the Director of the City of Newark, Department of Water and Sewer Utilities. And first and foremost, I want to thank the mayor and our municipal council and congratulate everyone that participated in the lead service removal program, County Exec Joe D, and the Governor Murphy and NJDP. And, this was a real collaborative effort with all hands on deck to make this project be efficient, effective, and very completed ahead of time, even with our consultants, many consultants, CDM Smith and Agro-Environmental. Thank you.
Yeah, and with that being said, I want to thank Gary Brune for saying that Newark did it in under 2 years. It was it was not under 2 years, it was under 3 years, but I appreciate the I guess sort of encouragement that it was done a little bit faster than that. But we were able to get all of our, we will be able to get all of our lead service lines replaced in under 3 years. So we're just gonna talk a little bit about some of how we got to where we are, some of the things that sort of took place that led to us replacing the lead service line program, as well as some of the challenges and hurdles that we had to overcome, and a little bit of what we would recommend for water purveyors and municipalities moving forward. So we hope that you are that you find some value in what we're presenting today, and we thank you for joining. So next slide. So like I said, the agenda will comprise of a little bit of the background of how the program came to be. If you want to press, I think, enter, or yes, a little bit of thank you. A little bit of the background of how the program came to be, the challenges that led to a need to be addressed, and what the situation was before we actually got to the point of a lead exceedance and replacing the lead service line. The next thing we're going to want to talk about is vision and goals for the lead service line, what we had for that program and how that came to be. Next, we would like to discuss our plan for keeping the community safe from lead exposure throughout the program. You'll see that we had a multi-step sort of approach to making sure that both the community was safe, that we were being transparent, that they had the information that they needed, and that we were delivering that information to every single resident possible in a mode that was most effective for them. The next thing that we would like to discuss is where the program is now and how many lines we've replaced, what we've done so far, what we have left to accomplish, and sort of the sort of things that you would want to keep in mind when you're putting in or implementing a lead service line program, and how we believe, based on the experience that we had and the challenges that we had to overcome, you might be able to get through this a little bit more efficiently. I know that under 3 years is an aggressive timeline, even if you're thinking that you won't be encountering a whole lot of obstacles, but we would like to share our experience and some of the things that allowed us to do that in the time frame that we've been able to do that. And the last thing that we'd like to discuss are the lessons learned and what we would tell other communities or utilities that are planning this lead service line replacement program. Next slide, please. So I'm going to turn this over to Director Adeem to explain sort of the historical aspect of how we came to replacing lead service lines, what sort of was the background or the context and the facts that went into the decision that we came to, and provide a little bit more information on that. So Director Adeem.
And thank you, Tiffany. So back in April of 2016, the mayor and the former commissioner of the state of New Jersey, Bob Bob Martin, I think it's Bob Martin. What's the name? We announced to the world that we were seeing elevated lead levels in the school system, the Newark school system. What came out of that was the New Jersey DEP and the Christie administration, Governor Christie administration, required every utility in the state to revise its lead and copper sampling programs that we had to submit by September of that year, 2016. And also they put in a little bit of funding to start testing schools all around the state. Most of us would know. In addition, they rolled out some pilot program for lead service replacement. I think it was 30 million put in there at that time. It was a pilot program that they were going to assist utilities on trying to remove lead service lines throughout the state. So, City of Newark, after 25 years of using a corrosion inhibitor, sodium silicate, received its first exceedance. We reported to the we reported to the NJDP. Nobody didn't come in and test for us. We reported to the DEP that we may have an exceedance. We tested about 113 or 14 homes, and at that time, 11 or 12 of them exceeded the 15 parts per billion. What came out of that was Newark doing the desktop analysis and doing some other things in the process. However,
You think it's full or you think it's
late
to the head?
2017, we noticed that we were going to have our second exceedance. My predecessor, Andrea Adebawale, the former director, my sister, my mentor, my boss, she thought she wanted to put a fresh set of eyes to come in and assist us on looking at what we were seeing.
Yeah, and then I would say, I call on the ground for around.
Needs to go on mute.
Okay, somebody needs to go on mute. If everyone could just look at their screen and see if they need to put themselves on mute so that we can hear from Kareem and not the background.
Okay. So at that time, we engaged several different independent consulting firms to come in and assist us on looking at different areas in the water system that may be affecting us having these elevated lead levels that we haven't seen in 25 years. You know, we haven't had an exceedance. What came out of that was one of our consultants that actually started, CDM Smith, we brought on board, actually to do an additional desktop corrosion control study and analysis, had us think outside the box. We actually dug up some lead pipes in all 5 wards of the city. Newark is made up of 5 wards, north, south, east, west, and central. And we sent them to the US EPA lab out there in Cincinnati. Mike Schock and Darren Lido and the crew. Hats off to US EPA for coming in and really spending some time and helping us get through this. In April of going back and forth with the state since the summer of 2017, we were able to have the state commit to some type of funding, and Newark rolled out a 10-phase lead service line replacement program over 8 years. We launched that program and we started going around the city trying to sign residents up to participate in this program. What came out of that was that the city of Newark doesn't own none of the lead service line. We don't own any part of the lead service line. The lead service lines are owned by the property owners or homeowners. We don't own the lead service line. So as we sign people up, we begin to find out that we would need the legislation on a state level to allow us to use public money on private property. So in June of 2018, we bonded out $75 million. And at the same time, we worked with our Exodus delegation in the state to get legislation, through to allow us to use public money on private property. And Governor Murphy signed that in August of 2018. Late September, we got our first, we had our third exceedance. We had our third exceedance in June, third consecutive exceedance in June also at this time. Governor Murphy signed the legislation. However, in late September, and I mean real late, maybe the 31st or the 30th, we received a draft report from the US EPA around the pipe scale that was leaching, scales were leaching out of the lead pipe into the drinking water from EPA. In a couple of days after receiving that report with recommendations and from our consultants, confined with the administration, US EPA and DEP, we started giving out point of use filters, 40,000 point of use filters. We mobilized, we announced to the world, we're giving out filters. We opened distribution centers. We went door to door, right, to give out filters in the western part of the city. Newark is served by 2 different water sources. We have 2 different treatment plants that supply about 60 MGD to Newark, 60 to 80 MGD demand to Newark, and that's the Pequannock system, and the Wanacue system. The Pequannock system is a 15 billion gallon reservoir system, and the Wanacue system is a 30 billion gallon reservoir system. The Pequannock system, same pristine water quality, both systems, but the Pequannock system has a open finish reservoir, right, that holds about 700 million gallons of treated water. Versus the Wanacue system, we don't have a finished reservoir. And a part of Newark forefathers thought the Cedar Grove, we call it the Cedar Grove Reservoir. It also acts as a balancing reservoir for our distribution system in need of fast demand, a major fire or some type of major catastrophe. We may need to draw water real quick. We use 2 different type of corrosion inhibitors in those systems. In the Pequannock system, we use the sodium silicate, which raises the pH. And in the Wanacue system, we use the orthophosphate. That draft report had let us know that, you know, the sodium silicate was not as effective as it used to be, right? So we moved on to maybe late our leader of the department happened to pass away in November of 2018. She fell ill. December of 2019, we had our contracts out approved by City Council for lead service line replacement. Those contracts were executed. And at the same time, we also had a contract out to put up a temporary orthophosphate feeding station at our satellite feed station to start putting orthophosphate into the Pequannock system. You know, I don't want to sound like I'm jumping around, but just when we rolled out the filters back in October of 2018, we also announced to the world our 4-step approach on how we would, you know, combat lead. One of it was immediately reduce the exposure to lead by giving out the point of use filters and a year's supply of filter replacement cartridges. Put in a new corrosion inhibitor, which was the orthophosphate, public education, but also remove the biggest risk, right? It was more important now to move the biggest risk of exposure to lead, and that was removal of the lead service line, right? So in May, our orthophosphate of 2019, our orthophosphate facility came online, but right before that came online, in March, we started groundbreaking in all 5 wards of the city, right? And it was a voluntary program to remove lead service lines, where all the owners would have to take the maximum of $1,000 per home, right? Because the city didn't own any of the lead service lines. And right before March, and I want to say in late February or early February, we did know in December, but the DEP confirmed that we would have our 4th consecutive exceedance. So we already knew, but DEP confirmed it. The $1,000 that we were going to charge per homeowner which would be the max, we wouldn't know until after each phase. So each phase, we would look at how much we spent on each phase, and we would average it out by the amount of replacements we did. And then we would charge the homeowner. They didn't have to pay up front. It was a thing, we looked at doing it after each phase. From the time we did groundbreaking until we ramped up the program, we had only replaced about 650 lead service lines. In a 6-month period, from May to September, on a voluntary program, we only replaced 650 lines. In July of 2019, the pipe study, we put a pipe study, it was online, it became operational. That's where we had a pipe loop study. We'll go in a little detail on that a little later on to explain what that is. However, in August of 2019, we announced again to the DEP and the US EPA and the world that we tested 3 filters. We had a report back that we tested 3 filters out of 40,000 or plus, and pushed these filters to the max. And I think 2 of the 3 didn't exceed the limits. And in September of 2019, the county executive, and this is what I mean, and we'll go deeper into this along the way, about collaboration on a state, federal, state, and local level, about collaborating and getting funding, but making sure that the political will and funding is the key to getting lead service lines removed. Thank you. It's the timer. Next slide. So how the program came about, we talked a little bit about, October 2018, rolling out the point of use filters and giving a 4-step approach, filters, orthophosphate, lead service line replacement, and public education. We rolled out a robust public education program, working with the US EPA, NJDP, Clean Water Action, some of our other community groups, to make sure we put out door knockers, billboards, having town hall and teletown hall meetings 7 days a week. At the height of our filter distribution and public awareness and educating around lead and lead service lines, as we ramped the program up, we were doing community meetings 7 days a week from the highest level in the city.
And sorry, I just want to clarify something or make a note of something actually before we advance to the next slide. I mean, you can say, yeah, so this is the, when I was speaking earlier about the approach that we were going to take, this is something that we spoke about very on in the process about what our approach to remediation of the lead exposure would be. So how that program came about for the city of Newark was a 3-step approach. And that approach was the immediate remedy, the intermediate remedy, and then the long-term remedy. So the immediate remedy to abate lead exposure was the point of use filters, obviously. The intermediate would be the orthophosphate facility that we built. And then long-term and permanent solution would be the replacement of all lead service line replacement or lead service lines, I'm sorry, throughout our distribution system. So those are conversations that took place immediately, like when we started sending out the pipe loop, the pipes to EPA, when we started to see that we were having our first lead exceedance with, in the first 25 years, like that was our first lead exceedance that the city had. Like those are the types of things that we started to discuss about what can we do in the immediate and the interim and in the long term to reduce lead exposure. So I just wanted to point those out as, sort of, we're going to talk about this a little bit later, but sort of crisis management discussions that you would want to be having with your communities as you go through this process. So,
and your and just to piggyback, and your regulators, and your regulators, so you can make sure that you're on the same page and giving out a comprehensive message. We can go to the next page. Right? So I'll let Tiffany talk about the crisis management, developing a plan. You know, she kind of already went over it, but we'll let her finish it off.
So I mentioned crisis management, and I say crisis, although we don't necessarily like to use that term because I think it implies something other than what we mean and with the media. But I mean crisis management in terms of dealing with something and in the immediate time frame that you have to sort of develop a plan and implement a resolution to moving forward. So the things that you want to think about in terms of crisis management is that it's a go situation. You have to be moving fast, you have to be thinking fast, and you have to be willing to put in the time. It's all about the will to move forward, the will to overcome an obstacle, the will to get past and resolve whatever is being put before you. So in order to do that, like I said, the first thing that we did was develop a plan. And that plan was that 3-prong approach to abating lead exposure to the community that we talked about. So in developing that 3-prong approach, what we wanted to do was, first of all, take ownership, right? Because we're the utility, we're the water purveyor. We want to take ownership of what's been done. Now, there's a lot of things that sort of took place that led to where we were. Scientifically, there's a lot of things that took place and a lot of things that you as a water purveyor or a municipality or community want to think about when you're thinking about conveying a message to your recipients, but you want to take ownership. You want to be accountable, you want to act responsibly, be transparent, and be compassionate, because we're talking about people's health, people's well-being, the well-being of their children, their mothers, their fathers, grandparents, people who are vulnerable. So you want to make sure that you're taking responsibility, being transparent, and most of all, being compassionate and your approach to all of this. Next slide. So I'm not gonna, reiterate everything that Director Adeem has sort of talked about when we went through the timeline of where we are, but we have over 300,000 customers, and those are direct customers that we're talking about. Those are City of Newark residents that we're talking about. We also have several 100,000 more bulk water customers that we have to think about when we're developing a plan and figuring out how we're going to abate lead exposure to everybody that we deliver water to. So those are the things that you want to take into consideration, not just the direct customers you serve, but if you do have other customers that you serve as well, if you have bulk water contracts, if you serve bordering municipalities and things like that, you want to take them into consideration when you're developing a lead service line program or when you're developing a lead abatement program in general. At that time, we had pretty good records of our lead service lines. The old timers that, had been here for quite some time kept, in my opinion, impeccable records. Very legibly written records of when a lead service line was installed, if it was replaced, on the date it was replaced, what part of the lead service line was replaced, things like that. So we had records that we could refer back to. Now, there was a certain percentage of our records that were unknown that we had to verify as we were going through our lead service line programs. But one of the things that you want to think about from the very start of your program, because it's going to be hard for you to budget without this information, is developing a lead service line inventory. And that's part of NJDEP's regulations moving forward and the changes to the lead and copper rule that we have. As the Director Adeem stated, we have 2 different water systems, one from the Pequannock, which is a water system that Newark treats and is our watershed about 25 miles away. It's 35,000 acres of forest and reservoirs that we have, and then also our Wanacue side. The only place where we had an exceedance was the Pequannock side, but for Newark, those two systems are considered one system because we're one purveyor. So it's two different supplies and two different treatment plants, but it's two different corrosion controls. The reason it's two different corrosion controls is because on the Pequannock side, we actually have an open finish reservoir water supply that is not present on the Wanacue side. So in our chemical treatment, we have to make that consideration of how are we going to treat the water and provide corrosion control and things like that, considering we have an open water reservoir treatment. So even though they're regulated and monitored, or even though they're two separate systems, they're regulated and monitored as one system. So the city of Newark as a whole received an exceedance, even though the Wanacue side, which you can see from the diagram here, is a significant part of our system. Next slide. So one of the first things that you want to do after you identify that, you know, and anyone who has lead service lines in their system has already identified that there's an issue that they would need to address, is the decision-making skills. So you want to make sure that you're evaluating every component, and that, like I said, if you have bulk water systems that are, you know, bordering municipalities, bulk water, anything like that, that you're taking those into consideration as well when you're thinking about an approach as a whole. You want to make quick decisions. One, and even though like at the time that we did this, it was sort of a immediate concern, not sort of, it was an immediate concern, but you're gonna want, even though at that time it was an immediate concern for us, even if it's not an immediate concern for you, it should be, but even if it's not, because you don't have a lot of lead service lines, or you don't have a lead exceedance at this time, you're gonna wanna make quick, hard decisions right now, because there is money available that multiple municipalities, water purveyors, things like that are going to be going after. And so you want to do those things and do the legwork to make sure that you're in a position to acquire the funds that are going to be needed for you to have a successful program. And doing so, of course, you're going to receive feedback or pushback from different entities. For example, if you're trying to do something that's going to have a cost share component, obviously that's not going to be something that's going to be popular amongst your residents and things like that. You're going to need to also learn the ability to pivot quickly and make adjustments. One of the things that we'll probably talk about is, you know, having to distribute bottled water and going out into our distribution systems with this, you know, great plan that we thought was going to work, and then having to make an adjustment at the very last minute because something that we relied upon heavily for the success of that program, like Wi-Fi, for example, wasn't working. Understanding the factors that led to the crises, staying on top of information and resources, positive and negative, and then roadblocks and challenges, of which the city of Newark had encountered quite a few. And I think, you know, it's part of the reason that we're having these sorts of peer-to-peer roundtables and discussions, because we want you guys to, you know, have the opportunity to learn from the mistakes that we've made, or even if they weren't mistakes, sort of roadblocks that we encountered and how we overcame them, so that you are able to be more efficient and successful in your programs. Next slide, please. So the next thing we wanted to talk about was compassion and leadership, and an understanding and invested public. I think a lot of media information that was received from, or regarding the city of Newark was not favorable. As a result, emotions are running high. The public is sort of outraged and feel like they haven't been giving the information that they have or were entitled to be receiving. All throughout that process, even though it's easy to sort of be on the defensive, what you want to do is stay positive and be empathetic to the community, because they're the ones being affected. And regardless of what you feel you've been doing, what you want to do moving forward is have a positive attitude. Be as empathetic to what they're going through as possible, and make sure that moving forward, you are being as transparent as possible.
Hey, Tiffany, I just want to say one thing, because I don't want to forget. And a part of Tiffany said, it's going to be a lot of negative stuff out there when you're implementing your program. It's important to stay positive, but also make sure you're focused on doing the work. A part of, although Newark was in negative headlines, DEP can attest to this, or other or people that's on the ground. We were actually doing the work. We were more focused on getting the work done that needed to be done than battling with the media, but staying positive with the community.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I think Newark sometimes beats itself up because we feel like we weren't staying ahead of the story, or we weren't putting our narrative out there as much as we wanted to be, like Director Adeem said. And most of that is because we were focused on doing the work. We weren't focused on what the media was saying, or responding to the media, or putting ourselves in a defensive position. What we did was do what we needed to do in order to protect the health and well-being of the public. And then, once we felt comfortable in what we were doing and doing that, then we focused on the media. I'm not saying that one way is better than the other. If you're able to accomplish both at the same time, that's the ideal situation, of course. But it is a lot of work, especially under the time frame and under the pressure that Newark was under. We wanted to get this done as soon as possible. Like Director Adeem said, initially this program was an 8-year program, which was not ideal. And the reason why we had discussions about keeping, trying to see if there was a way to expedite that program. But our focus was not on the media and the stories and information that was being put out in the media. I want to just address the question before we move on. And that question is, what occurred to all of a sudden have a high lead level? Was there a change in water treatment or a catastrophic break or other? I'll let Director Adeem answer that question before we move on to the next slide.
So water chemistry is very complex. Most of the water professionals that's on this call that actually treat water, that works in the treatment plants, would understand that, or most of the directors that has to review water quality data. In the early 2000s, as the regulations got more stringent and water systems started juggling disinfect product rules, disinfect byproduct rules, and other emerging contaminants, they started making adjustments or had to make decisions to stay in simultaneous compliance. And a part of that, you don't look at changes you make today. Back then, or we didn't. Technology is great now. You didn't look at adjustments or changes you make, or how they may affect you 5 or 10 years down the line. So it was changes that went on to be in simultaneous compliance. But over the long term, we started seeing the effects of some of those changes that wasn't directly in our eyesight when we made those changes. That could contribute to the lead leaching off of the pipes, and the sodium silicate, which boosts pH, which is still an approved corrosion inhibitor today from the US EPA, could have started to lose its potency at that time. So in short term, that's what it was.
Yeah, so I think, just to piggyback before we move on to the next slide about what Director Adeem is saying is that it's important to note that psyllium sodicate was and still is an approved corrosion control inhibitor, and that's what we were using. I think, like any technology or any scientific advancement or method that we're using or research, anything like that, like the science sort of progresses and improves, and we get more information as time goes on. And so this was one of those situations where we had no idea where that the sodium silicate would eventually start to become less effective based on the simultaneous compliance that we were trying to achieve. And so I don't think that's any fault of anybody, just as, doctors sort of learn new things about COVID every single day, and the guidelines are, differing and sort of changing as time progresses. And as we learn more information, is the same way that, 25 years down the line, after we've been using sodium silicate, we learned that we've had our first lead exceedance and sort of like the effects that has, simultaneous compliance has maybe had on corrosion control. So I think, it's to be expected in the scientific world, and it's not to sort of say that necessarily there's any sort of blame to be placed on one particular entity or anybody in particular. I think we just, as time progresses, learn more information, and that's just what it is. So as we are going through this process, and we can move on to the next slide, as we're sort of developing our three-prong approach and figuring out what we need to do, then we need to figure out what our team is going to look like, who has strengths where, what we need to do, and where we can put people where they'll be able to get this done the most efficient and effective way as possible. So obviously Kareem Adeem, having joined the water and sewer utilities from the age of 20 and worked his way up, had an incredible knowledge of the infrastructure of the city, and the knowledge of sort of our treatment facility and all types of things. And so he put in place, after our previous director, Andrea Adebawale, passed away, put a team in place, and that was John George, who was our engineer, and he was responsible for funding and contracts. And we hopefully will be able to touch on this a little bit more, but if we're not able to get to that, because I know we're running a little bit short on time, our funding and contracts, we were able to sort of put together contracts that were made the procuring process extremely competitive. And the way that we did it, by having, for example, for one phase, we would have a contract on phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 being opened immediately on the days after. So, maybe January 25th, January 26th, January 27th. And the reason that we did that was because we felt that it would make the pricing more competitive, which in fact it did. So, and John George was very instrumental in that respect. So he was part of our, he was heading up our funding and contracts part. I handle more of the regulatory and federal compliance issues. CDM Smith was our corrosion control and lead service line replacement sort of project manager from the consultant point of view. And then we had internal people, Celine Samuel and Tosin Adetutte, who were part of the analysis of the services, tracking our lead service line compliance and things like that.
Testing.
Sorry, Kareem?
Testing, lead testing.
Testing, yes, testing as well. Yeah, that's part of our compliance, but the lead testing. So figuring out and sort of tracking where we are in respect to the lead service line replacement program, where we were falling with our compliance, communications, and then Jerry Noddy, who was our professional engineer and handle our treatment plant operations. Next slide, please. So, and figuring out that team, what you want to think about, and we're going to try to go through the next of these slides pretty quickly, but because we want to make sure that you have time for questions, is understanding the team, like people's strengths and their weaknesses, assigning roles and tasks based on their strengths and weaknesses, and telling them what to expect, being clear about what your expectations are is very important, especially when you are under pressure. Next slide. So like we said, the immediate approach to our lead abatement program was the distribution of filters. And we had about 2.5 days, I would say, to figure out how we were going to distribute filters. I think on a Friday, we decided, the mayor, said, hey, we're going to be handing out filters. And we had about 2 days to sort of procure the filters, have them delivered, and then figure out a distribution process for them. So part of that was, being fiscally responsible and figuring out how we were going to distribute these filters in a way that we could track them, so that we could ensure that the population that received them were actually the ones who were in need. Because as you could see from our previous diagram, the whole city was not affected by the lead exposure. It was specifically our Pequannock side. So the Wanacue side, which is a significant portion of the city, was not affected by this. So we wanted to make sure that we were tracking this, because the city doesn't have unlimited funds, and none of you do as well. So we needed to make sure that we were handing this out in a fiscally responsible way. So the distribution of filters was the first component of that. And then making sure that we were communicating effectively to the public who was affected, who was eligible for these filters, providing them the information in a way that they were able to receive it. So, and that means if you have a community base that speaks different languages, then you should probably be sending out communications in various different languages so that they can fully understand what it is that you're trying to communicate with them. Also, don't become defensive, because many people, we had several people who from the Wanacue side were advocating that they needed filters, and you want to be able to communicate to them in a respectable and non-defensive way why it is that they don't require a filter, or anything like that. So you want to just make sure that you're educating and not being defensive. So that includes public education, having a stakeholder meeting, flyers, billboards, community meetings, anything that you can do. We have a State of the Water event every year to update people on where we are in terms of our water system, any upgrades that we're making, any upgrades to infrastructure, any improvements in the chemical processes, anything like that. We communicated in our water bills, we communicated on our website, any social media, Instagram, Facebook, any medium that we have to communicate information, we utilize it. And you want to listen to what it is your community has to say in response to whatever it is you're putting out, and respond to it appropriately. Next slide, please. So to that point, we have the leadserviceline.com website. That website allows you to do a lot of things. You can specifically check any address in our distribution system. It'll provide you information on where the lead service line, when the lead service line has been replaced, if it hasn't been replaced, when it's going to be replaced, by what contractor, what the contract number is. If all the right of entry and forms like that have been filled out, it provides you information about water filters, when the last time a water filter or replacement cartridge has been picked up, bottled water when we were handing that out, when the last time that was distributed, how many cases were distributed, anything that we can possibly think of that the public would want to know, and honestly, any information that we have, we try to make it available to the public. So this is the website that we have where you can sort of go online and pretty much look up anything. So not just with respect to a particular address, but you can look it up in terms of the whole city. So you can see a city map that will sort of demonstrate where we are in terms of our lead service line replacement on your block, in your neighborhood, across the city, where we are. Next slide, please. So this is the map that I was telling you about. This map is a little outdated right now. Most of this is green because we only have a couple hundred, if that, lead service lines to replace. So like Director Adeem said, when the program was voluntary back in March to September of 2019, we were only completing about 10 to 15 replacements a day. That's mostly because we were struggling to get people to opt in because there was a cost share component associated with that. When it became a mandatory and free program in September of 2019, we were doing over 100. This says 80 to 100, but we got over 100 at one time, replacements completed in a day. We estimated initially that there were 18 to 21,000 lead service lines throughout our distribution system, but there were a certain percentage of those that were unknown, which we were verifying by test pits. So that number increased as we, continued through the lead service line program. Next slide, please. So as you can see, this is sort of a snapshot of if you put in a particular address. So here we have an address over at Oliver Street. It will tell you, the program status of the lead service line replacement, water distribution, the filter distribution, and the bottled water distribution. The green dots represent service lines that have been replaced. The red dots represent homes where there is a lead service line, but we have not received a right of entry form. And the yellow dots represent homes where there is a lead service line and we have received the right of entry form and they have been scheduled. So that's the differentiation between the colors on this particular form or this particular snapshot. Next slide, please. So this is a snapshot of the lead service line replacement program tracking that we have. And this was developed with CDM Smith, who is our consultant, our engineering consultant on this program. If you look at the left side of the screen, you see that we have an estimated number of lead service lines in the program. And it tells you the number of assumed, it tells you various information there. And then if you look in this middle section here, it'll tell you the different contracts that we have, how much we have replaced, how much we have left to go. And then there's another snapshot of the replacement progress throughout the city.
Hey, Tiffany, I just want to jump in for 1 second.
Sure.
And this is, the city has, Tiffany spoke on it, but the city has 2 dashboards. The public facing dashboard is the newarkleadserviceline.com. And this was more of the administration's internal dashboard.
Yes, the Director Adeem is correct. So this dashboard right here, only the internal people can see. So CDM Smith, the director, myself, any engineers who are involved in the program, we can see this dashboard. This dashboard feeds into the outward facing dashboard that we have for the public, and that's the NorkLedServiceLine.com dashboard. So the information that we see here will reflect on that other dashboard. Next slide, please. So this is just, and this is outdated, I apologize for that, but this is sort of the progression that you can see with the funding source that we were able to procure in 2019. So as Director Adeem indicated, we were initially only replacing about 10 to 15 lead service lines per day. When we received the funding from the Essex County loan, we were able to increase that significantly to over 100 lead service lines per day. Next slide. So there was a monitoring and analysis that also took place, and I'll let Director Adeem talk about this, but this is the SharePoint site that we talked about, which is accessible by Newark, CDM Smith, NJDEP, and downstream systems. That's not the site that feeds directly into the NorkLedServiceLine.com site, but it's a separate sort of SharePoint site that we have with NJDEP and other systems that we provide water to. Director Adeem, do you want to talk about that?
I believe you're on mute.
I know I want to wrap this up. We got a couple of minutes here. We created a SharePoint site so our bulk water customers were able to share data from what they're doing at their point of entry, their water quality parameter testing that we shared it with the NJDEP, the City of Newark, and all those bulk water customers. So monthly, weekly, or daily, when we post results, we can share information. Didn't have to pick up a phone or have a bunch of meetings. We were able to see their information in real time. This was very helpful as we progressed into the program, entering orthophosphate or made chemical changes in the process of treating water. You can get it.
Next slide, please. Yeah, so this is sort of a diagram of the lead results that we've received for the 90th percentile. And you can see, obviously, I'm sure most of you know that as you replace the lead service lines throughout your distribution system, your lead samples will increasingly go down. So this is just a depiction of that. Next slide, please. I'm just trying to get through so that we
Let me just say something while she switched to the next slide. That's also after we entered the orthophosphate, right? So we know the orthophosphate, the pipe loop is monitoring, but also as we're still sampling those homes with lead, and the orthophosphate has been in 3 months, 6 months, 8 months, 9 months. In the sampling period, we're actually seeing the data that the orthophosphate is starting to have that scale perform around the remaining lead service lines in the system.
Yes, thank you for that, Dr. Adeem. So this is a diagram or a picture of our pipe loop study that we have. And the pipe loop study was sort of, it's supposed to replicate what we should be seeing throughout the distribution system. So we had three racks of 4 pipe loops, and we were sort of feeding the pipe loop study the same orthophosphate dosage that we would be delivering to our distribution system, so that we could see how it would be, they would be sort of what the results would be based on our chemical dosage throughout our distribution system. So that's what Director Adeem is talking about with respect to the decrease in our lead levels based on not just the replacement of the lead service lines throughout our distribution system, but also the conditioning of our pipes with the new chemical inhibitor of the corrosion control orthophosphate. So that's an important component as well. Next slide, please. So the challenges that we encountered are the things that we talked about, the filter efficacy in our system. We did the filter study after getting the filters from Pure. And like I said, we had about 2.5 days to sort of get that distribution process going. So we didn't have the time that we would want to test those filters beforehand, but we tested them as we were handing out the filters and getting them into the communities, and learned things as a result of that. Technology, I spoke about our Wi-Fi going down and things like that when we were in the middle of distributing filters, bottled water, things like that. So you want to take those things into consideration. Public education is a big component. So not just utilizing media, but utilizing your own modes of delivering information to your consumers, such as the water bills or community meetings, Zoom meetings, things like that. Resident participation. So you want to get this information to as many people as possible so that they have information on what's going on, and then pivoting during COVID-19. Next slide, please. So this is the point of use filter study. We tested initially 3 filters, and basically that was pushing them to the maximum that we thought they could handle based on what the filter Pure had indicated. The sort of reduction of lead would be, and that was out of an abundance of caution, because you have to think we're handing out 40,000 filters. Every system has a different sort of chemical dosage process that they go through, and we want to make sure that whatever we're doing in our system and the immediate remedy that we're implementing is actually going to be effective for our system based on our chemical processes. So we did test 3 filters. That sort of testing process did not go as we expected, and so we did a more robust, and anybody who is familiar with science knows that testing 3 out of 40,000 is not a scientific representation of what is going on in the system or across the board. So we did a more robust study, and that proved that over 99% of the filters were working effectively. Next slide, please. So this is a representation of what we found during our filter study. And ultimately what we found is that 99.5% of the filters that are properly installed and maintained are operating and reducing lead in the way that we hope that they would. So the 3 that we did initially, like I said, scientifically, anybody who is familiar with science would know that that is not representative of what's going on in general, but it was sort of a starting point to get us to a point where we did a more robust study and was able to sort of demonstrate to the public at large that these filters are working effectively. Next slide, please. So you want to make sure that you're doing your regulatory public notifications. Those I'm sure everybody is compliant with because they're required by either your state or federal regulatory agencies. You're holding community meetings, you're doing Facebook Live, Instagram, Twitter, especially in this COVID-19 reality that we live in. Those things are sort of integral to getting out information, and also tele-town halls. We also use robocalls as well. Next slide, please. Yeah, we do robocalls, quarterly newsletters, direct mailings, and we had a program with the DEP to get information out. These are just some of the public relations and media sort of insights that we have, making sure that you're staying on top of press releases, getting out your narrative before the press has an opportunity to dictate what their narrative is going to be, holding press conferences, utilizing social media to get your message out, television, radio, news articles, panels, speaking engagements. We hold the State of the Water annually to let people know what's going on with our water infrastructure and the changes and improvements that we're making. But any sort of medium that you're able to get access to would be great. I spoke about the technology issues, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on that, and just pivoting to make sure that you make accommodations for COVID-19. We also do water testing post-construction. That water testing program is run with 120 Water Audit. We are working as a partner with them. They basically send out a kit to residents 6 months after their lead service line has been replaced. The reason that we have this, Newark has a free water testing program that we've had for a very long time. However, because we were dealing with transparency issues and resident trust and things like that, combating the narrative that was in the media, we wanted to have an independent company come in and provide residents with an analysis of their water, so that they could see that, either, once their lead service line is replaced 6 months after, that they can be confident in the water that's being delivered to their tap. So we work with them. Those kits are sent out automatically. All they're pre-postage. So all they have to do is collect the water sample. There's instructions in there along with the chain of command. They fill up the water bottle up, they seal it, fill out the chain of command, put it back in the box, and ship it off. They can also drop those off at the water department, and we'll mail them off for them as well. But we found that this is extremely important in sort of building back customer confidence and trust with your residents. Next
Tiffany,
slide.
I know we're running close to the end and people may have to drop off. So I'm wondering if you want to, your last slide was about your advice to, and Olia can maybe pull it up, your advice to other municipalities who are just getting started. And if you can make it, in a brief, bulleted list, that might help because you've gone through a lot. Oh, and there's your slide.
Yeah, yeah, because I think we only had one other slide, or a couple other slides, but a lot of it we've already talked about. But the only other one was sort of where we are now, which is less than, about 200 lead service lines that we have to complete, which will be done in the next couple of weeks. But the advice that we have for the other systems, I think, which a lot of it we've touched on already, which is getting a plan, preparing for funding, which is extremely important considering this massive infrastructure bill that's coming down the pipeline, filters, post-construction testing, your communication education plan, websites, technology, pivoting for COVID-19, communication to the public, and provide perspective and manage expectations. So I'll turn it over to Director Adeem to see if he has anything that he'd like to add before we sort of close out or people have to drop off. But I think we've gotten through pretty much everything that we wanted to talk about.
There was a lot, and I know everybody, we haven't had as many questions because I think you've done such a great job. But go ahead, Kareem, I'll give you the last word, and then maybe if people can stay on and have a couple burning questions, we can get to them.
And some of my last word is I want to thank Tiffany Stewart for her presentation. Her first time out the gate handling the whole presentation. I thought it was wonderful. She was a little nervous, but she did well. I would just say that I want to answer one of the first questions, if I can, I see in the chat. It asks about the legislation. Legislation is huge. Making sure that, we ran into our first obstacle, we ran out the lead service line program, is using public money on private property. That was huge. It's a game changer. You need to make sure that you can use public money on you can use public money on private property in your state. We modeled ours off of some legislation we found in Pennsylvania, and our state legislation was able to adopt that real quick. The right of entry ordinance that the city of Newark passed was also a game changer in expediting this program to ramp it up, where we were doing 100 to 120 lead services per day. Remember, we expedited this program on September the 29th. And on September the 3rd, we had replaced 2,011 lead service lines from the 19th to the September the 3rd. But prior to that, we only did 650 in 6 months. So that was the legislation, the right of entry. We didn't need the homeowner's permission to replace the lead service line. We only need the right of entry, which somebody just need to give us access to get into the basement and replace the line. Huge piece of legislation. That legislation also allows for us to say that if you, before the transfer of ownership or deed of your house, if you choose to sell it, you had to verify that it didn't have a lead service line. And if it had a lead service line, you need to replace it prior to sale. And if you didn't replace it prior to sale, it has to be replaced. It has to be agreed upon with the new owner that is money there to replace it within 90 days. So all that stuff is huge. And we also have provisions in the state that the state allowed all the municipalities, after Newark did that, to put in legislation to draft ordinances for different municipalities on the removal of lead service lines. Another one in there. What's the next question?
Well, I
Maureen,
wonder,
help me.
Gary, do you want to jump in with your question?
I think Maureen, Kareem pretty much covered the questions that I had. I guess the one point I wanted to say was the fact that Newark did not charge a customer cost share, we think was really critical. It enabled them to go block by block and not skip around town as people put up their $1,000. That was really key.
So thank you, Gary. We never charged it down. We never got a chance to charge anybody for a lead service replacement. The mayor, after we made some financial gains that we were able to say it's going to be free. And a part of having a free lead service replacement was able to allow us to ramp this program up to go block by block and going block by block to get up to that 120 lead service lines per day. Bundling the contracts along with our partner CDM Smith and being able to pivot, making sure you got a comprehensive management team and consultants that's going to be with you along the way, right? To pivot when you need to. Having difficult conversations and making difficult decisions. Again, the truth doesn't get any support, but the lie will run a marathon, right? But now, if you look at all the work that we were doing, the pundits say we're a national role model. We're happy to share in what we were doing. I'm curious too.
Yeah, and one of the question was about sharing some of the customer letters and bid materials and that. And I'm happy to put together, a follow-up to the people on this call. We have something like 30 municipalities who joined. So Kareem and Tiffany, if you would be willing to send me some documents I can include as follow-up to this.
Yeah, we're willing. That's part of the reason why we're, having these conversations, because we know from going through the experience that it's a lot to deal with. So to the extent that we can provide anything that you guys need, we'll be willing to share that. So bid documents, any like customer letters, anything like that. Yeah, just let us know and we'll try to put something together so that we can get it out.
And Maureen, I would encourage anyone that's on right now to visit NewarkLeadServiceLine.com. It's so much information up there. There's so much stuff that you can see on how to roll out a program. I would encourage you to visit NewarkLeadServiceLine.com. And however, Gary made a good point. When you don't charge, we can see how not charging, putting the component of some type of fee against replacing the lead service line, how it can help you expedite your program. But you make sure you have to have an ordinance similar to the ordinances that you have about access to the meter 24-hour, access to get into a home to replace the lead service line.
And I just want to add to that, just in case it wasn't clear, the reason that is important is because we saw that first of all, we had a lot of challenges with people opting into the program and paying, you know, that, or agreeing to pay that $1,000, which we had spread over sort of a long period of time. Even that $1,000 being spread over a long period of time for them to pay back was still an obstacle in getting the program done. But once we were able to remove that cost share, we were able to also at the same time implement the program the way that we wanted to, which was a block by block approach, which means that we no longer had people, contractors spread out all across the city in different wards and different neighborhoods, mobilizing and demobilizing and all that stuff. So we were able to do a block by block approach, which significantly decreased the cost of the program. So just that one thing alone, removing that $1,000 cost share was, you know, pivotal and critical to us being able to significantly decrease the amount that contractors were charging us and complete the program in a time frame that, you know, was unprecedented.
And Maureen, just one little thing, key thing I forgot, and Gary always remind me of this. We made the program, the ordinance, and you can find that ordinance at the bottom of the NewarkLEDServiceLine.com website on the first page. We made the program mandatory. It was mandatory for every lead service line in the city to be replaced. And if you opt out, you had 30 days to replace it.
And what that means also, I just want to just let people know, and you know, like as you're preparing for this program, Newark, like we said earlier, Newark is 75% renters, right? So we have to get, traditionally, you would have to get the owner's permission to enter the property. What this allowed us to do was to get the right of entry from the tenant. And if we were still unable to get that right of entry from the tenant, it allowed us to get to go to the court and get petition for an order to show cause and allow us entry to the property for health and safety issues. So that's one of the things that you want to think about as well. We've only had a handful of those properties that have fallen into that category. If you have a renter who can provide you access, they're usually willing to provide you access. So that's one of the, you know, biggest hurdles that you have to overcome. But for those properties that, you know, maybe they are apprehensive about letting the municipality or the water purveyor into their property because they think you're coming in to, you know, identify code violations or things like that, and they don't want to give you access, you do have a remedy and a way to go about that will, you know, allow you to petition the court to allow you access to that property to abate a health and safety issue.
Tiffany, that's why the communication is so important with the community meetings, right? Because we want to explain to everyone, we're only here to replace the lead service line. We're not going to be looking around for code violations unless it's something that's just outrageous that we need to report. We're here to replace the lead service line. So that type of communication and involving those local community groups helps you, right? Because they know the pulse of the community and they're able to guide you through, you know, community meetings, conversating with the community and ensuring them, you know, what we're coming there for. Only. It's 200 lead service lines to replace. It's not 200. This is, you know, it's not 200. It's actually 98 homes that need to be checked. So you can look at the map. This is the internal dashboard. So as of yesterday, there was 198 homes that needed to be checked to verify that they didn't have lead. So we're doing about 35 of them today and another 25 tomorrow. And we got some on Saturday if we don't get the snowstorm that's coming. So we just need to verify that they don't need lead replacement. If they do, we'll replace the ones that we find.
And that's such an incredible success. And somebody in the chat said you're basically a national example of how to do the lead service line replacement. We clearly needed you for another 2 hours today.
We can have a follow-up.
And we can follow up and maybe dig into, you know, an aspect of this for other municipalities. I know somebody in the chat asked a question about how to do an inventory for communities that don't have good records. So maybe thinking about doing our next roundtable on inventory might be a good next step. Before we sign off, because I think we do have to sign off, I'm going to turn it to Gary in case he has a final word. And
now, Maureen, I think we're over, and I wouldn't prolong this. I would say Newark's done some things that others might want to emulate, and I think it's a credit to them.
yes. And so thank you so much, Tiffany and Kareem. Sorry about the Zoom issues we had at the start, but I think everyone here, I had 30 municipalities joining us, so everyone was thrilled to hear from you. If we are able to send out some follow-up bid documents and letters as examples, that might, you know, also go a long way with these municipalities. So thank you so much for your time. I know it's a busy season, and please let us know when your last lead line is dug up, because we'll be celebrating basically all over the country. So kudos to both of you.
Thank you.
Thank
And,
you.
kudos to Tiffany and New Jersey Future and the lead task force team. Did good job, Tiffany. Great job. Excellent.
Thanks, everyone. I'm gonna turn us off now, but the conversation continues.